Welcome to Seeking Numina, the Sacred Places podcast. I'm your host, Elise Wells, and today we're going to talk about, do sacred places have to be natural, or are man-made sacred places just as powerful? And how does that interplay really work? Welcome to Seeking Numina. I'm your host, Elise Wells, and I invite you to connect with the sacred wild within and around you through Numina, or sacred sites around the world, and the wisdom they hold. Together, let's remember the old ways, build relationships with land spirits, and dare to reach out to the fairies. The sacred wild is inviting you to dance in the moonlight. Will you answer their call? So let's talk about sacred places. What makes a place sacred? Why does it need to be that place? What makes that place the one that's sacred? So I think the short answer to the question, are man-made sacred places, real? Are they powerful? The answer is yes. The answer is heck yes. Sacred places are places where we go to intentionally connect with the divine. So these might be places that have a land spirit that wants to wish us well or give us certain types of advice, or maybe has a certain domain that it is associated with. So for example, if you go to Livadia in Greece, one of the places I bring people on my retreats is the Oracle of Trophonios. And Trophonios is a land spirit that works through dream and trance to relay prophecy to the querent, or the asker of the question. Somebody who needs to consult the oracle visits Trophonios, and Trophonios actually absorbs their fears, their limiting beliefs, their false beliefs, and alchemizes them so that you can move forward without them holding you back. That is a very specific land spirit. It is a sacred place because it has that gift that it can offer us. Stonehenge is a sacred place that has many gifts. It has lots to offer us. Minerva Sulis, the sacred baths in Somerset, in Bath, the city in Bath in England. We had Rachel Patterson on the show recently discussing that beautiful place and her book, Sulis. That is a river where people go to heal. So these are sacred places that it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. Is it man-made? Is it the land that makes it sacred? I think it's both, because we've all heard the expression, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, yes, of course it falls, right? Yes, a place is sacred whether any human recognizes it or not. We don't have hubris to say, like, if we don't know it's there, then it's not really sacred. That's not real, right? Of course it's real and sacred, regardless of our acknowledgement of it. And in fact, I think there are numerous sacred places around the globe where we have yet to uncover the nature of their message for us, or the power of their mystery. And sometimes, like in a couple episodes ago, I shared that sometimes land spirits will tell us no for any number of reasons. I encourage you to go back and listen to that one or watch that one, to get some answers on that side of it. So I won't get into it too much here, but sometimes, we can't even see certain elements of our land until we're ready to connect with that message, until that land spirit is ready to connect with us. So sacred places are not all known and accounted for. Many of them are existing in their own space. We can think of this also in terms of, the continents. There are places on this earth that are inaccessible to us. Antarctica, for example, is only sort of kind of accessible to humanity. The North Pole, same, even less accessible. The South Pole, even more inaccessible. And then as we consider things like the deepest, darkest places in the jungle, or, the hottest, most remote places in the desert, these are also, I'm sure, wildly sacred. I know they're wildly sacred, and they are very much not man-made. They're in fact so natural that human might not quite be able to access it, which I actually kind of love. Like, it's one of my favorite things. The longer I'm on my path, one of my favorite things is the mystery of it. Like, I actually love that we will never access certain places. Even the bottoms of the ocean. These are sacred places so far beyond our reach. But I think that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. So, what about these man-made sacred places? I would argue that there is no such thing as a fully human formed sacred place. So, sacred places, and I go into detail in Sacred Wild, an invitation to connect with spirits of the land, available November 8th, 2025. In that book, I really go into detail of kind of the ways we can create our own sacred spaces. And the easiest one, the most obvious one, is the altar. Our altar is a place where we can show up to commune. And the more we show up there, the more we call in the gods and goddesses, the more we invite the land spirits, the more, energy we put into this space, the more sacred it becomes, the more that that place becomes a sacred place. Altars are the perfect example of created sacred space because they're places that are dedicated to that purpose. And the egregore of spiritual work starts to build up and around it. It's beautiful. It's powerful. And as we extend that concept to perhaps gardens that are sacred places, places of commune, maybe you actually build. I have a friend who has a Wheel of the Year garden. Her garden is actually in 8 quadrants. And she's about 5 years into this and she's still working on it because climate change as well isn't helping. But she actually is trying to take each piece of that pie and make it grow, have it grow, I should say, not make it because we're humans, land is land, but enabling it to grow in the season of the Sabbath. So, perfect reminder that the Sabbaths aren't days, they're seasons, 6 week seasons. And so, in that 6 week season, llamas, certain flowers bloom, that sort of thing. So, that's quite a sacred place. She's a practicing witch and she uses that sacred place to commune with her deities on those given holidays. So it's become a sacred place. You walk through that garden and you know that it is spiritual and sacred. Is that any less of a sacred place because she infused intention into it? Absolutely not. Because that space was co-created by the plant spirits, by the land spirits that allowed that garden to be on itself, and of course herself and the magic she does there. And every time she goes there to do another ritual, she's building that again and again and fostering it and nurturing its growth. So sacred places, maybe that's a better way to look at this. Sacred places are living places. They are places that want to proliferate. Nature wants to exist in abundance. It needs to exist in abundance, in fact. Nature only can exist in abundance because that is how it proliferates itself. A flower, why do people get allergies in pollen season? It's because all the trees and plants are instilling in the air, in every chance it gets, it is giving that land abundance. That's what we're reacting to. It's to too much abundance in the air, funnily enough. When we look at harvest time in the Magic Kitchen, we have an episode coming out for the Kitchen Witch's Hearth, our summer edition, and we're talking about in there a little bit, we talk about the abundance of our gardens and how, like, if you grow zucchini, sometimes you get way more than you planned for. And we actually can complain about that. Like there's always stories every summer of people like sneaking zucchini into their neighbors' cars when they're, like driving past or things like that. Like we have such an abundance from nature sometimes that we have to get wildly creative to work with it. And that's pretty beautiful. That's pretty beautiful. So all that to say, spirits are abundant. They want us to engage with them because we are spirits too. I say this a lot, but it's the truth. Humans are just the land on legs. We too are carbon beings. We share between 60 and 70% of our DNA with every plant. Think about that. 60% of our DNA, minimum, in every plant. That's pretty powerful. That is pretty powerful. And so it's almost, when we think of it that way, there is a logic to how deeply we can truly connect in sacred places and with land, especially as you add to it repetition, as it becomes a place of community or commune. So, so I would say that's how man-made places can be deeply spiritual, is because they're a space of co-creation with land, And they're also a space where we are fostering that growth of spiritual connection. We are bringing it to the surface there so much with the work we do, with the repeated work we do. Every time you do ritual on that land, in that place, before that altar, you are reminding it of its role, its purpose. You're letting it come to the surface and you are allowing it to proliferate into abundance. So you're basically creating the conditions for land spirits to do what they do best, which is to be spirit. Land is an expression of spirit in its purest form. And when we foster that, we very quickly find that it also starts to become a magnet for other spirits. It might be other humans that want to connect with you. It might be the squirrels being way more comfortable with you than they are with your neighbors. It might be birds nesting closer and closer. I mean, when I had my altar in my undergrad dorm room, now, dorm rooms, as many of you probably are familiar with, are public shared spaces by nature, and they are also restricted. You know, you can't have candles, you can't have incense. So you have to get pretty creative with these altars. They can't quite be what you want. Plus, when you're in college, you're not necessarily swimming in wealth. So I didn't have statues, I didn't have crystals, all these more expensive things. They have been much more challenging for me in the past to get. So it wasn't until I was in my path pretty long that I actually got to play around with tools and stuff because I started as a young person without resources, without stable housing. So I think there's a lot to be said for mobility in the craft and how land spirits, well, maybe that's another episode, how land spirits enable us to connect even when we are nomadic and mobile. Sometimes they actually are our best allies in that regard. But anyway, all that to say, my altar had to be removable if we had company. The windowsill where I would put all of my altar pieces, which at that point was like a tarot deck, and then like stuff I'd drawn. Like I didn't have stuff. I would draw things, or I would have sigils, or I would back then I was really into, as I am now, I was beginning my work with Inanna, so I would actually draw um her what's the language called? Linear B symbols for herself, the goddess kind of, you could call them sigils, truthfully, of her that represented her. It is not about permanence. I wanted to say that in all of this. I would have to move everything all the time when we had guests. People would literally sit their butts on that windowsill when we had guests over, which was a lot because it's college. So that altar was very mobile. And yet, because I was doing ritual there so often, it became a place where I could easily connect. You know, the egregore of the energy of that space was clearer and clearer and clearer. And eventually, I actually was able to commune without kind of even calling in all the quarters. I was really nervous to admit it at the time because it felt wrong, like it felt like I had to stick with all the rules, but I was actually able to get connected quicker over time because that space would kind of trigger my mind and body like, okay, I'm here, so that means I'm doing magic, but it also would tell that space was being told by the repetition of that action that that is what that space is for. And there was a tree outside of that window, and I've shared this story before, but a bird actually nested in that tree. So it like chose to be as close to my altar as it could. And I like now looking back, I like to think that the land spirits felt my energy and were like, okay, this will be a safe place for this bird. And it certainly was. So you start to be more and more connected to nature when you commune with nature. I mean, it's obvious to say it like that, but the spaces we create where we connect become places that sort of are magnetized for nature to come as well. So you really, anytime you're doing spiritual work, people will say this and it sounds wishy-washy, but it's very true. We, by working with spirit, by healing ourselves, by doing shadow work, by embracing the lessons of the unseen, we are healing the collective. We are bridging the liminal between physical and spiritual, and mental is kind of that triangle in the middle of that because it's our will, it's our thoughts, it's our hearts and minds that allow us to bridge that. So it's very important to never feel like the work you're doing is silly, selfish, just for you, random. It's not. You are doing it alongside thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of other practitioners who may have different labels than you, but all of us are doing the same thing in connecting with nature and connecting with source. And notice that I'm not differentiating between outdoor spaces and indoor spaces as sacred places where the land will be involved. Because your home or your workplace, if you're fortunate enough to have a maybe sneaky altar at work, these indoor spaces, guess what? They're built on land. So the land is in no means impeded by concrete, brick, or much less any of these flimsier modern building materials. So the land is 100% with you. The difference only is that when you're indoors versus outdoors, you are impeded. Our physical senses are impeded from experiencing land. Land is not impeded from experiencing us. We are impeded from experiencing them. So, yes, you will have a much more fruitful land spirits connection outdoors, but you can still connect indoors. So, for those of you in the Great White North who maybe can't leave your home every single day of the year because of extreme weather, or maybe those of you in, like, I know when I lived in the Middle East, I was not going out in the middle of the day in August to do anything. So you might be like, well, my practice with land spirits is kind of paused sometimes because I can't go outside. No, no, no. Bring the land spirits to you. They're already doing that. They're already here. They're in our house. We are we just are more able to hear them outside. They can hear us just fine inside. So that's where I would direct you to my episode about bringing the land spirits indoors. Bring them indoors. Like give yourself physical reminders, ask for gifts from them that you can bring indoors to your sacred space that you are creating, to your altar. So the last thing I wanted to touch on about created sacred spaces is temples. Our ancestors in Europe, in Mesopotamia, in the Middle East, and definitely in India, like subcontinental Asia, India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia. These are and actually also South America, Mesoamerica, all of these places, all of them. England, I mean, like pretty much every country that we have record of, they began worship outdoors. Indoor temple spaces grew as humanity's nomadic selves kind of faded. I mean, truthfully, people used to be very nomadic, and as agriculture evolved, nomadic cultures died off and people became more city dwelling. And that was gradual, of course. I'm truncating probably 20,000 years of history in that sentence, but we had to learn to live in places together, as towns began to be formed, villages, and then eventually cities. We had to figure out how to work together, and that is when temple spaces began to be built. Also, the practical nature that you wouldn't want to build a temple and then never go back to it because nomadic roots might change year to year. So really it was after nomadic life began to fade in favor of cities and agriculture that we see temples being built. And the first temples were altars in groves, and then those altars got walls, and then those walls got roofs, and then those roofs got fancy. And that's how we get the modern day church. It really, I mean, again, truncating history here, but that's essentially the flow of it. It did start in sacred groves. How did people choose those groves? Any number of ways, but I imagine the land spirits were always involved. So even when we are talking about indoor spaces, we are talking about a legacy of the land's involvement in that creation. And nomadic people, think of it this way too. How did they know where they were meant to stop? How did they know they were meant to build a city? Or maybe they didn't know what a city was going to be. Maybe they just knew, okay, I'm going to actually stay here for an entire growing season and a fallow season and a winter and the planting season. And that was pretty revolutionary. I'm sure those first tribes who did that, I'm sure they got all kinds of flack from other nomadic tribes. I mean, it's fun to put yourself there as best as we can from our modern lens and feel what that might have been like and try to imagine it. And I imagine that a lot of the conversations were about the land. Like, no, this land is welcoming us. Even the concept of hospitality. What if that was given to us as a gift by the land? What if the land was the first to be hospitable and we had to learn from land how it's done? That is a resonant truth for me. that the land gives us every lesson we need to be the best humans we can be. We just have to learn to listen to it. And as we built indoor spaces, if you've been to St. Peter's Basilica or, these big gaudy churches that exist, I mean, we've taken it too far. We've taken it pretty damn far. But when we're talking about groves to altars with some poles or statuary, to altars with poles, statuary, and walls, to altars with poles, statuary, walls, and ceilings, like that beautiful original growth of sacred places that are man-made, I think that is something beautiful to reflect on. The way that people just cared for a space so much, they wanted it to be more beautiful and to be more maybe comfortable to be in. That roof allows them to worship in thunderstorms perhaps now. So it actually increased our connection with nature at first. It enabled us to show up for nature by creating accommodations for our low human needs. And I actually think that is beautiful. So our sacred places, our man-made ones less powerful than natural ones, our natural ones superior or more important to visit? I think the answer depends on the energy you bring, as always, but also the energy of the created space. Was it created by somebody with a shared respect, a similar view that you have to land, or was it created for hubris or personal gain? If it's called like the the Pepsi temple for goddess worship and Aquafina, blah, blah, you know what I mean? That's like a very different intention than like, most goddess temples I can think of. Like I'm thinking of the Goddess Center in Glastonbury or um, Selena Fox's Circle Sanctuary I think it's in Wisconsin. These are sacred places by pagans for pagans, very open spiritual acceptance of the people who visit there. Mount Shasta. Mount Shasta is a really interesting place because it was sacred to Native Americans. And then as they were moved and pushed off of it over the hundreds of years after that, or 100 or so years after that, the colonizers, the white people, started to realize the sacredness of that land, and that land began calling people from all over the world to it to grow its spiritual connection. So it's a very interesting question. It's a real chicken and egg conundrum. What came first? Sacred places, sacred land, perhaps we could say, or or human worship of them? And that's a really difficult question to answer. But I don't think either are superior or inferior. I think it's about intention. And I think it's about the lessons you need to learn. You might go to a sacred place on a retreat, for example, and have 15 of you there. And 7 of you have a positive experience, 7 of you have a negative one. That's a random number. I don't think it's usually negative experiences with land spirits, but maybe it's like that person cried, that person was uncontrollably giggly, and then that person said they didn't feel anything. Like you will always have a vast array of reactions to a sacred place anyway. So it is all about what you need in that moment. When I went to Pompeii, I was struggling to connect with really like with my purpose. Like I was like, hey, how do I get clear on this? Like, should I turn back? Should I just stop trying to teach, magic and connection to land? Like maybe it's not for me. Maybe that's not my path. Maybe I'm all wrong about this. And I was at Pompeii and I was walking around and I was thinking about the ancients, and I go into the Temple of Apollo and it takes my breath away. Now, this is a temple that has been destroyed and thousands of years later excavated. And I mean, no one has worshiped in that temple. No human has worshiped in that temple for what, 1800 years, something like that, probably more. But it still had such a palpable presence, such a palpable presence. And as I was walking around these ruins, taking in the columns, trying to picture what it must have been like thousands of years ago, I asked Apollo, you know, am I on the right path? You're all about charisma. You're all about connecting with people. Can you help me understand? Like, am I crazy? Like, is this not good? And I got pretty emotional. Like when I connect with the gods, that's always how I know they're there, is something in my heart opens and I know that there's a channel open there. And it often makes me cry, or even when I'm not unhappy or not sad, like there's like an offering of tears that happens where the water just kind of comes down and I cry. And so I that started a little bit, and it was hot, y'all. It was like really, 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 really hot. It was like 98 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's the middle of the day, and like I've already drank like probably 200 ounces of water, and it's hot. So like to be crying and like it was not, it wasn't like an enjoyable experience per se, but it was a powerful one. And I was like, I just need a sign, I just need a sign. And so I wait in there. I wait and I wait and I wait like 15 minutes. And I'm with my family actually. I'm with a group, so we're all on our own, but I knew that they wanted to meet at a certain time and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to leave. And I hadn't gotten a sign. So I'm sitting there crying. I'm desperate in a way. I'm like, please help me. Please give me something. I get nothing. So I turn and I leave. And as I step out of the temple, literally, I'm not exaggerating, as I step out, I get a ping on my phone. Somebody joined my Patreon for the first time as I stepped out. And I was like, okay, that was the sign. That was exactly what I needed. And I needed to connect to that space and then leave in order to get the sign. So sacred places will speak to us and connect to us and give us what we need in that moment. Nobody else in my group even was like, they were like, oh yeah, there's a temple of Apollo. I mean, they didn't have that experience. I had that experience because I needed it, because I was looking for it, and because the land was able to connect with me. I was receptive and it was receptive. So that's my take on it. I'm quite certain that man-made sacred places and natural sacred places are kind of one and the same, and they both have such merit. And the lessons that you need to receive from land, you will hear, you will receive. And the land will guide you towards what you need to experience next when you are ready for it. So take your time, build your disciplined practices of connecting to the land, to the places that call you, and know that when that lesson is there for you, when you're ready to receive it, you will. Thank you for seeking Numina with me. I am your host, Elise Wells, and I look forward to seeing you next time and Seeking Numina, the Sacred Places podcast. Bright blessings. Thank you for seeking Numina with me today. Join me at patreon.com/Elise Wells to support this show and get access to a library of rituals, exclusive videos, meditations, and more. To learn more about my upcoming retreats, book a tarot reading, or learn with me in workshops, classes, or mentorship, visit seekingnumina.com.